So, so let's jump in. I'm going to start off with a little bit of a story. Um, as some of you know, I was before I started my little journey as an independent opinion journalist. I spent about 30 years in finance. I call it finance. It's sort of a catch-all. I started off as a mortgage-backed bond salesman and ended up as a trader on Wall Street. The first part of my career, though, in New York, I just want to tell a little story. So back in, I guess it was the spring of 2007, I noticed this article. This was back when uh, I still got my news on paper. I'm thumbing through the newspaper on the trading desk, and I noticed this company had gone bankrupt. Um, and the name of the company was let's see, I'm just trying to think, um New City Financial or something like that. I guess what struck me about it was a New Century Financial. There we go. What struck me about the article was that, well, first of all, that it was even in the Wall Street Journal. It wasn't page one. It was just kind of a, like a side column. And this was a company that was in some kind of a mortgage business. And as a mortgage backed guy, maybe that's why it jumped out at me, or former mortgage backed guy. And I didn't really understand what the article was telling me or what the significance was, but there was a colleague of mine that had worked at the Federal Reserve. So I walked over to the other side of the trading floor and I kind of, asked him why they're making a big deal out of this company. I think they were on the West Coast. What's the deal with them going out of business? Why should I care? And this guy, kind of looked it over and he'd been looking at some similar stuff. And he said, well, I think we might be going into a recession. As it turned out, looking in the rearview mirror, you can see these things a lot more clearly. Um, that bankruptcy, that failure of that, sort of no name company, which by the way, their stock and trade was subprime mortgages. And that failure, now that we have the benefit of hindsight, we know that was one of the harbingers of the worst financial crisis in US history to date. And so, some things have happened this week it's just sort of making that little occasion rattle around in my head, or that, that situation. This morning, something happened that has never happened before. And certainly not in my 30 years um, in the finance business. But even beyond that. So this morning, um, at 8:30 on the first Friday of every month, there's some exceptions if there's a holiday, but it's pretty rare. But on the first Friday of every month, we get what's called the Employment Situation Report. That's the official name, but most of you would know it as the jobs report. And that's when, we find out what the employment rate is, how many, what the payrolls, what they call non-farm payrolls, and all kinds of data. The participation rate tells us, how many people are in the workforce, all these different things. This morning, we didn't get that report. And there's no plan to issue that report. Um, this is the first time I believe, and I'm probably going to write. I know I'm going to write something about this that'll go out. So, if it's and it's going to be a lot more detailed and not so off the cuff. This is the first time I I'm going to say in the post-war era that we have gone 30 days with no plan to issue an economic report, especially something as important as this. And you have to understand, this is the kind of thing that the Fed weighs their decision making on. So, everybody's saying, "Oh, the Fed's going to cut rates in December." No, they're not, because how can they? They have no idea where the economy is. They have no idea how many folks are laid off or how many folks got jobs. Don't know. The reason that this report isn't happening is because of the shutdown. And take it even a step further, because we've had shutdowns before. This isn't the first time. In fact, um, we've had delays in numbers like this coming out. I want to say in 2013, there was a shutdown, and the report was delayed for a couple of weeks, but it came out. We didn't just not have it. What is happening now, though, is they have suspended doing the report. And they kind of don't have any choice because they're so shitty at running this government, or they planned it this way. Maybe we'll circle back on that thought later. Doing this kind of reporting, the BLS has hundreds of people that are doing surveys all over the country, and they're reaching out to companies, households, accumulating this data. Well, we've either laid off or fired everybody who would do this work. So there isn't anybody to do it. So they cannot issue an unemployment report. And what's worse, we didn't have one in September. So I don't even have to look it up. It has never happened, people. It has never happened where the United States of America did not issue an unemployment report for 2 consecutive months. Meanwhile, these assholes are running around having great Gatsby parties and, flying jets to their dates and doing all this crazy shit. And nobody seems really pressed about this happening. And it's not just the Trump people. And I guess this is what made me jump out here this morning in the way. This is a little unusual for me, I know, but it is particularly upsetting to me. Okay. I guess because of my background, I take this shit personally. And the idea that I'm turning the TV on, I'm looking over here at Bloomberg television, which is kind of my go-to because it's not cable newsy and trying to both sides stuff. They do some, but this is what traders have on their trading desk all day every day on Wall Street and all over the world. Everybody has Bloomberg, either that well they have the television channel, but they also have Bloomberg's data, which I can't afford that, and it's probably for the best because I would just be sitting there like this all day and I don't want to do that. But my point is, I'm trying to figure out why they're talking about anything else. There's nothing else to discuss. I don't give a shit about AI right now. We don't know where the economy is. We have no idea. I can give you some numbers. I mean, look, we have suspicions. We have other private sources. So there's what's called the Challenger Job Report, or they do they do some good work. But again, it's not the BLS. So I'm looking over here because this is one of those occasions where I literally dragged my son who's in college. I dragged out the laptop that he left behind just so I could get a handle on some of this. So here's what we know this year in terms of job cuts. Okay, so and understand the BLS does one thing, but these private companies, all they really do, or all they can do, is like they can estimate based on announcements that companies make about. So for example, pardon me, Amazon announced, excuse me, Amazon announced, I think it was 16,000 jobs that they're going to lay off, or positions that they're going to cut. But we don't know when that's going to happen. That doesn't mean those people immediately have no job. So that 16,000, it may show up over a period of months, but it's not like suddenly all those folks don't have a job. But it's a good indication of where things are going. So in terms of announced job cuts, here's what we know from the challenge. It's Challenger Gray and Christmas is the name of the firm that we're talking about. So in January, there were like 49,000, which was up from the previous January about 28%. And then you skip ahead to March of this year, announced job cuts, 275,000. I mean, that's a pretty big spike. Skip ahead to September, 54,000. Well, in September, and I actually wrote about this, we were bumping up against a million announced job cuts. Well, now we've gone past a million. As of, I guess, yesterday, Challenger put out, their report for this month, or, looking back. And by the way, you get reports in November, but you're looking back to what happened in October. So just to tie that in with the BLS, the numbers that we should have received today would tell us what happened last month. And the numbers that we didn't get last month would have told us what happened the month before. So it may be a whole lot worse than what Challenger is able to tell us. You also have ADP that does similar reporting, but theirs is based on payrolls. So it would not catch me if I suddenly just stopped, you know, uh, if you'll allow me to call this a job. if, but if I just stopped, my wife stopped our little plant business, they wouldn't really know because we don't do payroll like that. So they only know about those kind of folks. Hang on just a second, folks. I'm going to get my do not disturb thing going here. Sorry about that. All right. So, um, yeah. So I'm just, as you probably can tell, I'm just a little bit bothered by this because I've listened to Bloomberg on television. They also have a radio channel that's a little bit, it's a different set of folks. And they're just blowing by this like it ain't shit. And it's something. It is really something. So um, just to give you the significance of that $1 million announced layoffs, we haven't seen anything really close to that since 2020. I believe it was 2020 during the pandemic. And I think I'd have to check. I think, yeah, Trump was president. So he's kind of got a pattern of fucking things up. Okay. And so, I'm going to pull together some tables on this. I want to look just for a second, if you guys will bear with me, if to just kind of scroll through to see if anybody's got any questions or anything like that. But I just felt like this is something we need to discuss. And if we look at the big picture and just kind of think about the story I started off with, sometimes it's just one little thing that is the harbinger of a whole lot of really bad shit that's getting ready to happen. But I'm just looking at no economic reports and it's not, by the way, no economic reports on jobs for 2 months in a row. What are Democrats talking about right now? We ca- they have what you have to understand is with this shutdown and the lack of enthusiasm on the part of Republicans about even doing anything about it. They're not even coming to work, y'all. Okay. And Trump is just, being Trump, I guess, walking around like he doesn't know where he is. He's not doing anything about it. The Senate's not, I don't see anybody saying anything. I was watching actually, it was somebody on Substack. Some of you may know or follow Julie Regenski. I think is how she pronounces it. She was on Bloomberg, and they'll have a panel, and it'll be somebody that's from the left and somebody that's a Republican consultant or whatever. And so it was Julie and a woman who is some Republican strategist. I don't know who she was, and they were it wasn't a bunch of shouting like you see on MSNBC or anything like that. They're, being professional. And at the end of it, the anchor asked the Republican strategist, "So what do you think is going to be, what kind of timetable do you think? How long do you think this could go on?" You know what this woman said? She said, "January." I'm like, January? So she seemed to think, and she's a Republican strategist, so I guess she's talking to some Republicans. She seemed to think that this situation could go on until January. So what does that mean? We got folks barely getting their SNAP benefits for this month. If Trump and the Republicans have anything to say about it, they're not going to get them next month. So that's December. So so just think about that. We haven't gotten unemployment numbers for 2 months in a row. So you telling me we're not going to get any economic numbers till January? And just to keep in mind, it's not just the unemployment numbers. I was just pardon me, I was just looking, trying to figure out that, what other numbers are we missing? So for example, the consumer price index, that's been postponed. So we don't really know what's up with inflation. We kind of know when we go to the store, but this is what the Fed relies on to make their decisions, y'all. Okay, so that's postponed. We don't know until when, and I don't know how they're going to pull the information together. Who's going to do that? So let's just say the government's open next week. How are they going to go back and reconstitute all this stuff? How? Retail sales. Don't know. Okay. Monthly retail sales and new home sales been suspended, not postponed, suspended. All these data sets that they use to figure out GDP. So we are in the fucking dark. And I kind of feel like that's where they want us. I kind of feel like as and look at Tuesday. As bad as shit went Tuesday, maybe if we really knew how fucking bad stuff was, folks would be at the White House right now in the streets. Pardon me. And I suspect, in a way, I almost feel like this is what they want. Because, Trump is trying his best to figure out how to do this insurrection act. And I got news for you. If folks don't get their SNAP benefits and planes ain't flying in a couple of weeks and it's Thanksgiving and people can't go see grandma, I don't care if you're MAGA or who you are, people are going to start getting mad. And Christmas is just around the corner. It's not funny. It is something that this is, if I had presented a movie script to Hollywood that said, "Hey, okay, here's the story. So we got this president, and he's just going to stop reporting economic numbers, and he's going to start bombing people all over the place, and then he's going to tear down part of the White House. They laughed me out of Hollywood. Think about it. It's crazy. But this is where we are. So, I just kind of had to go off a little bit about it. If you guys have any questions, I'll try to answer them. But and like I said, I'll try to write something a little more detailed about this. But it, to me, this is beyond house on fire because it affects everything. How are you going to buy a house right now? If if you're so fortunate to be in the house buying market, how are you gonna? You need a loan. What's the interest rate going to be? Who knows, right? If you've got a company, how do you know whether it's a good time to hire people or fire people? You trying to start a business? Is this a good time? I don't know, because we don't really know where the economy is. So, hmm, go MAGA. I guess. I don't know. I wrote something a couple of months ago, and I think it was like, and some of the time I write stuff, and it sort of reflects how old I am. But I just think about this movie, Trading Places, which for traders we consider it a Christmas movie because it sort of happens around Christmas. And Eddie Murphy is like, learning the commodities business, and he starts talking about how, shit is looking bad and guys not gonna be able to buy the kid a GI Joe with the kung fu grip. And if you're old enough, you'll know when that was a thing. They're not gonna be no kung fu grips this Christmas. I don't care what you say. It's just that how can there be? We don't know anything. We have no idea. So that's all I got, folks. I hope it helps. If it does, um, by the way, you can always DM me. I try to be, unlike some folks, I try to be responsive to people that have legit questions. And
Operation North Star has a good question.
oh, hold on a second. My wife's standing over here and she's watching the chat. What's the question?
Operation North Star says, "Here's my one and only question: How do people protect themselves from the oncoming or current depression?"
Hmm. So I don't know if you heard that. So someone in the chat asked, "How do we protect ourselves from what they believe is ongoing depression?" I don't have a good argument against that um, thought. You know, this is funny. I told my wife the other day, actually, the fact that I'm not rich is is probably pretty good protection. I don't owe a lot of money. I don't have a lot of debt. I got some, but not a lot, right? Don't really own any real estate. So I think that's what's coming. I think the real estate market, and again, I'm just a guy on an island in North Carolina. I don't have any secret information, but I've been around for a minute, and I watch Zillow, and you should do this wherever you are. Just watch in your area, and what I watch is price reductions. $10,000, 25, $50,000 price reduction. During COVID, houses weren't lasting a day. And now I'm not saying people can't sell their house, but they're having to adjust their expectations on the price that they're going to get, right? And so that is one of those things that I look at. Um, you know, folks laughed at Fonnie Willis when she said, "I keep a lot of cash." And again, that's something I wrote about a couple of years ago whenever it happened. But I'm not sure if the dollar falls out of bed. Look, I'm not saying that, your money's not going to be worth anything, but I'm saying cash is probably a good thing. I do. You're looking at a guy who made a living selling big institutions stocks. I do not own any stock. I don't own any. I don't. This market is in an area that makes no sense to me. So I would say if you're in the stock market, every time you see a new high, if you can get liquid, do it, because we're going to look up one of these days and the bottom is going to fall out of this. Okay. Um, I'm just sort of throwing stuff out here because I don't know where people are, where your money is. So I'm not giving investment advice. I'm just saying if it was me, you couldn't put me in Bitcoin. If it was me, the stock market, and I've said this before, it is being held up by about 7 or 8 stocks that are nothing but it's all AI. It's it's a I almost said something ugly. It's a circular situation going on where you've got Oracle doing deals with Microsoft and Microsoft doing a deal with Amazon and Amazon, and it's just this. And I'm not saying that these are not, these companies aren't valuable, right? I'm just saying there is a bubble right there all by. So even if none of this other shit was happening, I'm looking at what's going on with what they call the Mag 7, the Magnificent Seven. Don't make me name them. It's Amazon, Facebook, um, Nvidia, Microsoft. Okay, let's pause on Nvidia. Here's a stat, and it's a crazy one. So Nvidia is a $5 trillion market cap. Okay, $5 trillion. I'm gonna step out on a limb and say there are not countries. As a matter of fact, I think the United States and China might be the only 2 countries that have a GDP that is bigger than Nvidia's market cap. Think about this, y'all. What is the stock market? What does the American stock market? I'm pointing over here at my TV, like y'all can see it. What does the American stock market represent? The value of American companies, right? I guess. Maybe there's a much more um, complicated definition, but let's just go with that. So, if the stock market represents the value of American companies, how can the stock market's total valuation be more than the GDP of the United States of America? How can that be? Just something to think about. Um, maybe I'll go into some detail on that. I'll follow me on notes because a lot of times I'll have some idea pop in my head like that, and I'll write it in notes. It never makes it to an email, so I use notes like Twitter. Excuse me, probably too much, but so I just these are all the things I'm thinking about, and I'm not ignoring that question because I think it's important. I'm not able to see the future. I just know I've been through more market collapses than I would like to admit. The first being Black Monday. So I've seen them all. Some of them worse, some of them quicker. The the housing crisis was scary as shit because um, so I did business with Lehman Brothers. And during that time, a colleague of mine, well, the two of us had a meeting at Lehman Brothers. And we're, you know, they had huge building. I mean, you walk in and their lobby seemed like as big as a football field. And so we get situated, they take us upstairs and we're sitting around in an area waiting on the person that we're supposed to meet with. And my colleague had worked at Lehman Brothers. So somebody that he knew from having worked there walked out. You would have thought it was a funeral. And you just have to understand how disconcerting it is or was. when, we were just small fries, my company, compared to Lehman. And you got people walking around at Lehman and they're looking fearful because all their stock or their wealth is pretty much in Lehman stock that is fast becoming worthless. So I think about all that shit. That's the kind of stuff when you start talking about market collapses. These are the kinds of things. I don't care how rich you are, you can't escape. So I'm gonna have to post this, but just as I was getting on, I heard somebody talking about on Bloomberg, or maybe it was CNBC, and they mentioned Bill Ackman, big hedge fund guy, asshole, honestly. And he was talking about, well, people are spending all this money, like, and he threw out the idea that the government might backstop some of these companies. I've got to dig into it. I don't know. But when I hear backstop, I hear somebody thinking, well, what if, what if all this shit that we're spending money on, what if it doesn't work out? Then what? Okay. So back to my earlier point, watch what is happening with AI. It is spending like I've never seen before. So earlier I mentioned that Amazon is, they're laying off, uh, gonna lay off 15 or 16,000 people. They're not just firing them, to like replace them with AI. These are all white collar jobs, by the way, if I'm not mistaken. That is not what is going on. It's not like we're gonna get rid of 16,000 people and whatever their jobs were, we'll do it with AI. That's not why they fired these guys. The reason they fired them, as I understand it, is because they just to remain competitive. I mean, look, these guys are throwing up data centers all over the place. Just to remain competitive, they've got to keep up with what Facebook and Meta and all these other countries are doing. Every time you look up, somebody is signing an agreement with either NVIDIA because they got to buy GPUs in order to power these data centers that they're building all over the place, right? Well, companies hadn't budgeted for all this kind of spending. So what Amazon is doing is they're cutting costs and redirecting it towards spending for AI GPUs. Those GPUs are expensive as hell. And that's what I'm hearing is these guys didn't fire a bunch of white collar guys just for the hell of it to make, to replace them with robots. They're firing them to free up cash to spend on data centers and GPUs. So they're making some enormous bets. And then you look, last month, Facebook has been hiring, they stole folks from Apple. They've been hiring all over the place. And last week, maybe the week before, they laid off a bunch of the people they just hired. So crazy times, folks. Crazy times. I'll leave it there. I don't have all the answers, but when I turn on when you have a seminal event like 2 straight months of no economic picture, and it, to me it just feels like that's all we should be. That's all these financial um, um, networks should be talking about. And I'm looking over here at Bloomberg, and they're talking about the internet. I'm looking at CNBC, and they're talking about, something AI, this or that. Mm-mm, I'm telling you. And so, just putting it out there. I, like I said, my my DMs are open. So don't light me up too bad. But I mean, I'm available, and as I find out more information, I will share it. Um, One last question, if I can read it. If there was one thing that I would change about this setup, it would be that they would save all of the chats. just like they do I'll send out a recording of this pretty quick, but it would be great if the chats came along with it, because most of the things that get said in the chats, I honestly miss them. So I'm gonna step off and let you folks get back to your lives. But I just had to get this off my chest this morning, and I hope that it's been helpful. And if so, as I always say, please subscribe, like, share, become a paid subscriber. It helps with the resources. It also helps me stay in the. I looked up the other day and I was ranked in U.S. politics, which kind of surprised me. I was even ranked. I won't like name check anybody, but I was ranked higher than a few folks. So anyway, hope it helps. And hey, it's Friday, so at least we got the weekend, right? Stay safe, folks. Take care.